English translation self-responsibility. Self-obligations excerpt from The Way of Life by Billy. Edgeworth Albert Meyer.
Unfortunately, human beings generally pay far too little or no attention to their self-responsibility and self-obligations, and many a human being may ask himself in complete ignorance what self-responsibility and self-obligation actually are. The answer to this question is that they are those duties which every human being has towards himself. For example, that he practices and applies honesty, or that he cultivates true mercy, modesty, and human being in himself and towards all life, and so on. In fact, duties towards oneself are the first and most important for human beings, even if some people do not recognize or even suspect this. Unfortunately, many human beings simply live for the day without ever thinking about their duties to themselves. As a result, many human beings take offense at their neighbors and their neglect of duty without considering that they, as the recipient of the offense, are not acting any better and are practicing and pursuing the same neglect of duty. However, they do not respect this because they do not even realize, let alone even suspect, that they are fulfilling their own duties and obligations. Fulfilling one's own duties and fulfilling one's own obligations is nothing other than dealing with oneself. However, it is precisely this way of dealing with oneself that is of the greatest importance in human life, as it determines how a human being also behaves towards fellow human beings and the entire environment, and what value of respect and reverence and what respect he shows his neighbor and all life. Therefore, if a human being wants to live truly and justly, he must consider and understand that the fulfillment of duties towards oneself is always and forever the most important and foremost. In addition to the fact that the correct and just treatment of oneself is certainly not useless and not uninteresting, it also ensures that the treatment of fellow human beings and all other life of all kinds is handled correctly. In fact, human beings should always be big enough to be able to control themselves, their actions and their speech, etc., to such an extent that they always remain in control of their actions, their speech, and their feelings. This means that he must also be in control of himself when he is forced to speak up and raise his voice in order to create order, etc. This is also part of the fulfillment of personal duty and self-duty. A human being can never be forgiven if he neglects his own duties and self-duties, regardless of the wise way in which this happens. It is also unacceptable for a person to socialize with other human beings if they only hang around in order to shine and thereby neglect their own society even one iota. Such a desire to shine and to pose with fellow human beings is really nothing more than an escape from oneself, because one's own ego cannot be cultivated enough to fulfill one's own duties and obligations. For this reason, such human beings also always prefer to concern themselves with foreign affairs rather than with the appropriate and necessary formation of their own character and the fulfillment of their own duties and obligations. Truly, he who always hangs around outside his home becomes a foreigner in his own home and in his own family. The same happens to those who live only in distraction, who hang around in discos, bars, pubs, and alatrias. They become strangers to themselves, strangers in their senses and desires, strangers in their consciousness, and strangers in all their thoughts, feelings, and actions. Inevitably, such a human being must try to strangle his deadly inner boredom in the pushing and shoving of idle human beings, whereby he loses all self-respect and confidence in himself. He completely forgets how to look at himself and see himself as he really is. He becomes a foreigner to himself, which causes him to fall into a nasty embarrassment when he suddenly finds himself vis-à-vis de soi-même, when he suddenly finds himself confronted with himself. Unfortunately, there are all too many human beings who go to places, events, societies and circles, etc., where on the one hand they can make a big show of themselves, or on the other, where they are flattered that the mucus drips down the corners of their mouths. As a result, A human being loses the last taste of the voice of truth, quite apart from the fact that the last remnant of self-respect and the last possibility of recognizing self-obligation and self-duty disappears and sinks into a bottomless abyss. In the end, it gets to the point where the human being in question can no longer even hear himself, namely the voice of his conscience, which unpleasantly tells him the truth and draws his attention to the fact that he has slipped down the slippery slope of neglecting his own duty and self-duty, despising it. So he disregards his conscience and prefers to run far away, to where his inner and well-meaning voice of conscience is shouted over by the din and tumult of the pleasure seekers, etc. Human beings, whoever and whatever you are, always beware of neglecting or even disregarding or denying your best and most loyal friend who is closest to you, namely yourself, who is always and for all time closest to you. So never neglect yourself and honor your own friendship with yourself. Be gentle, open, and honest with your inner friend, with yourself and with your own self. Always make sure that you never turn your back on yourself and therefore also not on your inner friend, who you will certainly always need. Make sure that this friend does not turn away from you just when you need him most. Therefore, always be on your guard, because situations and moments occur again and again in life that specifically require you to remain true to yourself and your inner friend. These are situations and moments that specifically require you not to abandon yourself, also when everyone else abandons you. These are situations and moments in which dealing with yourself, dealing with your own self, is the only comforting and the only valuable thing that not only keeps you afloat, but also enables you to fight for life and to continue living. But just think what would become of you if you failed in such moments, if you did not live in peace with yourself, which would also mean that you would be denied all comfort and help from the side of your feelings and thoughts, and from the side of your consciousness. Whoever you are, human being reading these lines, if you want to be satisfied with yourself in true form, and if you want to find peace, serenity, joy and love, comfort, happiness, and tranquility in your dealings with yourself, then you must treat yourself just as openly, honestly, sincerely, carefully, justly, delicately, and finely as you do in the best minutes and times with those fellow human beings with whom you show your best splendor and courtesy. So you must not put yourself down by mortification or self-abuse, neither by self-disregard, nor by bitterness, or by feelings of inferiority, and so on. Nor must self-neglect ever appear, nor also the spoiling of your own ego through flattery of any wise. Whoever you are, human being reading these lines, always take good care of the best health of your body and psyche. Do not also disregard the health of your consciousness, but always make sure that you do not overtax your consciousness, psyche, or body. If you are constantly demanding of your body, psyche, and consciousness, you are doing well and promoting the fulfillment of personal duty and self-duty. But he who simply rushes wildly at it is wasting and squandering a tremendous good that is sufficient several times over to elevate him above human beings and above his own destiny, a good against which all the treasures of earth are vain beggars. On the other hand, he who fears or shuns every breath of air and every effort and exercise of his limbs, thoughts and feelings, lives a life that is fearful, hesitant, and fickle. All attempts to set the rusty springs in motion, if the person concerned gets into this situation at all, end in miserable failure because he destroys his own natural powers. This is also an evil and unforgivable disregard for the fulfillment of personal duty and self-duty. Those who lead a nerveless oyster life withdraw into their shells at the slightest vibration and close them up without seeing and realizing the reasons for the slight vibration, whether they are of dangerous or completely harmless origin. On the other hand, those who constantly and incessantly spend themselves and do not recognize any dangers will one day perish from the dangers because the necessary caution wears off and eventually withers away completely. On the other hand, Those who abandon themselves to their passions without ceasing and constantly hoist the sails of their lusts, addictions, and vices will ultimately run through the glittering desert, dying of thirst, just like those who overexert their consciousness and slowly lose their sense of reality. This may happen at the very moment when the best constellation for new experiences and new discoveries is actually occurring for the person concerned. In the further case, however, he who allows the faculties of his reason and intellect, as well as his memory and his entire rationality, to remain dormant, or who shudders or even shrinks back from the smallest effort or the smallest struggle, not only has little or no true enjoyment of personal responsibility, fulfillment of personal duty and self-duty and evolution, but is lost without salvation and doomed to destruction, in which courage, strength, will, and determination, as well as self-respect, become a farce. If human beings do not constantly look after themselves and do not fulfill their own duty and self-duty, then they sink and end in misery, whereby even suicidal thoughts are not uncommon, which in many cases also materialize. Fulfilling one's duty and fulfilling one's own duty are therefore also anchored in the value and idea of keeping one's own psyche healthy and lively, so that it cannot succumb to any challenges. The psyche, however, can only be damaged by feelings and thoughts of an unreal nature, that is to say, by fantasies caused by fear, suffering, worry, and sorrow, etc. But fantasies arise through faith and other beliefs. Imaginations, however, arise from beliefs and other misconceptions, in particular imaginations that arise from the fact that human beings suffer from worries, sorrows, fears, and pain that they assume they cannot bear or cope with. As a result, they simply give free rein to their thoughts and feelings in an uncontrolled manner and allow them to overpower them without realizing and being aware of the fact that this gives rise to factors that have a negative impact on the psyche and begin to demolish and destroy it. As a result, self-duty and self-obligation are reversed into the exact opposite of what should actually have the upper hand in human beings and protect them from all the harms of the wrong way of dealing with themselves. Therefore, every human being should beware of all imaginary suffering, both physical and mental. In the correct treatment of oneself, the body and psyche come first in all attention, and only in second place do all those other things appear to which the human being must turn his attention. Human beings must always be strong towards themselves and within themselves, and they must never allow themselves to be brought down by every little adverse incident or every little physical ailment or discomfort. Human beings, therefore, always be upright, always be courageous in all things, and always be confident. Everything is fleeting, and time never stands still. Whatever may happen in the world or anywhere in the infinite expanse of the universe, everything passes and comes to an end, especially those things in human life that relate to physical ailments and discomforts, as well as psychological effects such as worries, sorrows, fears, and pains of all kinds, etc., through the fulfillment of all duties towards oneself. That is to say, through the fulfillment of one's own duty and self-duty. That way of dealing with oneself takes place which has a positive dominating effect in every respect, and, through steadfastness, allows all evils, however small or great, to be overcome. By really overcoming everything negative, however, the entire life is slowly but surely dominated, after which everything negative is then channeled into oblivion to such an extent that the former evils, worries, fears, adversities, ailments, discomforts, and pains are no longer disturbing and no longer a burden. In particular, this is achieved very quickly when all attention is diverted away from the stresses and strains and focused on something else and neutral. If you want to be healthy and enjoy yourself, just as you can enjoy your fellow human beings and your environment if you live in harmony with them, then you can also only do this if you live in fulfillment of your own duty and self-duty. To do this, however, it is essential that you respect yourself so that others can also respect you. And indeed, others will only really respect you if you are able to show yourself sufficient self-respect. This self-respect, however, requires that you are always correct, honest, and truthful towards yourself and your entire environment, and that you do not engage in infamous or other intrigues that are capable of maliciously damaging and discrediting not only your entire environment, but first and foremost yourself. Always do all things honestly, sincerely, and openly, so that you are never burdened by hidden machinations, and so that they do not cast you in a dark light. So, never do hidden things of which you would be ashamed before yourself or in the eyes of a foreigner, should such a person become aware of your reprehensible actions or otherwise become aware of them. Also, never act or speak only to please other human beings or to gain their favor. Always speak the truth freely, openly, and unvarnished, even if many people cannot bear it and are offended by it. But truthfully, only those who have many things to hide and are hypocritical towards themselves and those around them are offended by the open and honest word of truth. Falseness is the profession of such human beings, as is sneakiness and wanting to be better, religious and sectarian aberrations and fanaticism, as well as shirking the truth and much more. So always act, think, feel, and speak well and decently, honestly, and truthfully, otherwise you will forfeit your own respect. But as decent, good, honest and truthful, as positive neutral, good and truthful as you are within yourself, so also be outwardly in every respect when it comes to applying and openly proclaiming the sublimity of your ego and your fulfillment of your own duties and obligations. Don't turn the reality of your sublime self into a murder pit, and also let yourself be recognized outwardly in your well-formed neutral positive balance. Your clothes also speak for you accordingly, because you always shape your outward appearance according to your innermost being. Therefore, whether your clothes are dignified, comfortable, elegant, or extravagant, etc., it is of the utmost importance that they are very clean and well-groomed, as is also the case for your teeth and hair, fingernails and toenails, intimate areas, and your entire body. Never be lazy in your clothing and grooming, also not when you are lost and lonely somewhere in the deepest desert, and no human being can see you. So never go about dirty, not even in secret, because you owe it to your self-respect alone to fulfill your own duties and obligations. Do not dress dirty and ragged and never unworthy of your station, whatever it may also be. Even the beggar is able to clothe himself in decent and clean clothes, even if these may be patched and worn in countless places, and correspond only to his very minimal needs. So never walk unlawfully, and do not walk crooked or drunk on alcohol or drugs. Always practice good manners, also when no one is watching you. So also walk with good manners when you are alone with yourself and have only yourself for company. Thus alone you can stand before yourself in reverence and rejoice in your own good manners towards yourself, respecting the fulfillment of your own duties and self-obligations, which you also cultivate towards yourself in complete seclusion and solitude. Therefore, never misjudge or misunderstand your own worth and never lose confidence in yourself. Always maintain an awareness of your own human dignity and that of your neighbor, so that you are never tempted to disregard or condemn yourself or your neighbor, as the unrighteous and self-important do, who can also cause you or your neighbor to be sentenced from life to death, even if they can never and in no case be responsible for this. Always remember that your feelings are just as correct and honest as your entire attitude and actions. And also remember that you may always be just as wise and skillful as many others. Always remember, too, that you will never lack the zeal and integrity to do as good and sublime things as anyone else. Pursue what is good and better, and never be lazy to be better than you know yourself and think yourself capable of. Always be mindful of your own fulfillment of duty and self-fulfillment, which is also based on the fact that you never despair and never become disgruntled if you do not reach the same intellectual level or moral stature as another human being. In terms of evolution alone, there are no two human beings in the entire universe who would be at exactly the same level of development. Wherever you look, you will see human beings and other life forms that are at different stages of development and, at best, come close to each other in certain respects, but always with recognizable differences. So it is and always will be impossible to put yourself on an equal footing with another. You will always be lower or higher than your neighbor. Therefore, do not be unjust to yourself if you cannot be equal to a higher human being in terms of evolution, but consider other good and valuable aspects of yourself that the other person may lack and that you may have ahead of him. On the other hand, bear in mind that even if all human beings as such are equal and without difference in terms of values, they are nevertheless differentiated in evolution, and in this respect are partly lower and partly more highly developed. Consequently, it follows that not all human beings simply belong to lower or higher evolutionary stages, but that a mixed relationship prevails. It is also impossible that all human beings can simply be great and only achieve great things. The great live from the small, and the small live from the great, which shows that everything is creatively well ordered and fairly distributed. So we can't all be small, and we can't all be big either. Where would we end up if this were not the case? The truth is that there would only be great ones, because human beings always and continually strive for the greater and greater, which alone ensures that progress and advancement in any evolutionary form takes place at all. If you want to live in self-fulfillment and self-fulfillment, then also never allow yourself to be dominated by any desires. You must also never allow the desire to master you, which often encourages you to play a brilliant leading role. Never let it overpower you, for you would be entering realms that demand of you the most vicious deprivations, humiliations, endless struggles of all kinds, and such immense powers that you would not be able to master them any more than many rulers and dictators can, which is why they degenerate viciously and bring death, destruction, bloodshed, and terror, as well as oppression, enslavement, war, and murder upon the world. Playing a brilliant leading role in life means doing much more than just the usual, especially if this leading role is to be of such a nature that it is to be evolutionary in love and creative truth for the human being concerned and for the entire environment and all other life forms. This truly requires an inner greatness that corresponds to much more than just something extraordinary or even something normal. The fact that this has actually only been achieved by very few human beings on planet Earth so far is proven by all those who have risen to become great rulers by force or through the low intelligence of the people, and who bear names such as Genghis Khan, Kublai Khan, Agrippa, Attila, Caesar, Nero, Ceausescu, Khomeini, Hitler, Stalin, or Saddam Hussein, etc. And the list of such domineering genocides and actual failures could be continued indefinitely. Well, the addiction of human beings to wanting to be great and important is very difficult to combat, or even get rid of through the inner feelings of wanting to be great and important. This is particularly the case with human beings who suffer from inferiority complexes, and for whom all unreal machinations are just good and right and cheap enough to put themselves in the public spotlight or in front of their believers, such as the so-called mediums and channelers, spirit and demon summoners, as well as the alleged contactees with extraterrestrials or other this and other dimensional life forms, etc. If the urge to want to be great and to play the main role is already difficult for normal and healthy human beings to overcome, how difficult it must be for those who are obsessed with power and inferiority, or who deceive themselves, such as the aforementioned mediums, channelers and contactees,
etc. Truly,
it is extremely hard to shed the inner, pressing, powerful unworthiness of wanting to be great and more, And it is all the more difficult when you become aware of the mediocre creatures you actually live among, who do not recognize and appreciate in any wise how great you actually are, what is in you, and what highest praise you would actually be worthy of. Oh, how unfortunate it is, then, that we are regarded as the last, most simple-minded and pitiable simpletons, while all those are proclaimed high-born who attain all advantages and dignities, as well as titles, etc., in their sleep, only to look down in their glory on us poor pings, grinning maliciously, and gorging themselves on our misery of not being able to do anything. Of course that is harsh, damn harsh even. But is that really the case? Is it not rather the case that everyone is envious of others who achieve more in life simply because they make every effort in all things and actually fulfill their personal duty and self-duty, while the other person finds fault with everything and negates everything? But if one negates, what use is it if he tries incessantly in all possible and impossible areas and in all conceivable subjects, if he does not become master of himself and his actions, feelings and thoughts, etc., and if he therefore fails to fulfill his personal duty and self-duty? Everything will fail for him, and he will not only curse himself, but also all his fellow human beings and the environment, life in general, and the state in particular, which in truth can never be blamed for the fact that the curser and cusser is a zero and a failure. After all, what can the state do if the complainer lacks the necessary initiative and the will to fulfill his own duty and obligation? Certainly, some people want to be great in their own house, but they lack the necessary initiative to assert themselves. But is this not his own fault, or should it be the spouse's fault if the man of the house fails to assert himself in the absence of the fulfillment of his own duty and obligation? Should it be the woman's fault if the man of the house does not earn enough money to maintain the family and the household, when the woman's duty is only to look after the children, the house, and the hearth, and keep them in order? And should it be the woman's fault if the head of the family is weighed down by self-generated domestic worries and problems, and simply goes about his daily work routine because he has to? It is certainly not the woman who is to blame for all of this, but rather the head of the household who is oblivious to his duties and does not fulfill them. Many a human being feels very deeply how everything in him is perishing, but nevertheless he cannot make up his mind with any fiber to simply become a mean fellow, a thief or a swindler, and cheat, while others do not care at all and cheat and deceive their fellow human beings, whether consciously or in self-deception, as the media and channelers, etc., do. Those, however, who still retain some decency and a sense of honor and honesty and integrity within themselves, make every effort to keep their heads above water by all permissible means and in all real ways in order to regain solid ground under their feet. They are the ones who continue to pull their carts along the wagon track until they finally reach their destination safe and sound. We can empathize with all of them and the difficult battles they have to fight and endure, and we feel for them and call out to them that they should persevere and not lose heart, that they should strengthen themselves and know about providence and their destiny, which will surely save them from every impending and all-destroying misfortune. Truly, there is a greatness in human beings that allows them to perform true miracles, and whoever is able to achieve this greatness and also actually achieves it suddenly stands high above everything. This greatness, however, can be inherent in every single human being and is absolutely independent of the evolutionary state of the person, their fate, and their external estimated value. It is based on the inner value of the ego and on the material consciousness, but it is characterized according to the gay-vault of the fulfillment of one's own duty and self-duty. Boredom is the death of all initiative, and those who succumb to boredom fall into addictions and vices and go astray. Let every human being therefore always be a good and pleasant companion to himself, who can entertain himself personally to his own satisfaction and knows idleness only as necessary recreation.
However,
A human being is also never completely idle during rest, and is at least mentally and consciously occupied with things that are necessary, whereby a good philosophy of life in particular corresponds to those points that are valuable to human beings. Anyone who memorizes too much will atrophy and develop a self-centeredness that is not only repulsive, but also self-destructive. It is correct that new ideas are always being grasped and developed, regardless of whether these new ideas come directly from oneself or from other human beings, from the environment or from books, radio, or television. Only very few people are able to grasp how boredom, poverty of thought, and self-centeredness lead to degenerating into a monotonous and uninteresting being, as is also the case when human beings only ever move in circles of their own favorite topics and favorite terms, as well as in circles of their favorite jokes, favorite stories, favorite actions, and favorite speeches, etc. However, human beings who move in this circle are not only selfish and egotistical, but also so self-centered that they only repeat their own lazy and hackneyed jokes and flimsy stories, etc., like a treadmill, so that they don't have to let the next person have their say. They negate and throw away everything that does not bear the seal of their own words or actions, etc., on its forehead, because they only allow themselves and their own lowly intelligent sayings and assertions, their monotonous actions and suggestions, etc., to count, because they only like to hear themselves speak, act, and see themselves in the limelight, even if everything and anything they say is just cold coffee. The fact that they are still opinionated and somehow domineering is only of minor importance when this human being is to be judged and it is established that he is an extremely and immensely bad and false self-socializer. Without a doubt, the most boring and blatant form of self-society of a negative nature appears when a human being is in a detrimental reckoning with his conscience. In this state, he is no longer at one with himself, which can lead to self-loathing and suicide. In the same case, however, it is possible for the same human being to develop an unbridled hatred for any fellow human beings or for the entire world instead of suicide, and to attempt to murder or destroy them. If you want to convince yourself of this fact, just take a look at your own emotions, moods, and moral states after a depressing or even devastating event. Everyone can realize how tremendously morose and distracted human beings become, and how much of a burden they are to themselves in the worst ways when they have spent a series of pointless and perhaps even harmful hours, or when hours of grief tear at their guts because someone very close to them has left the circle of the living through death. Failed business deals, etc., also lead to the same devastating moods, as do quarrels and bad words, insults and abuse, and much more. But how different and much better the moods, etc. look when the human being has had a pleasurable and joyful day, when the past hours of the day were crowned with success, or when happiness in love, or simply happiness was in the house. So, depending on what has happened, the human being is either negative or positive in their own society, which naturally also makes them responsive and react accordingly. But in fact, it is not enough for human beings to simply be good, kind, entertaining, and pleasant company in positive cases. No, this is far from enough. Far from flattery, human beings must show and prove themselves to be their most loyal, best, and most sincere friend. And if he wants to have as much favor, reverence, and respect for himself as he would wish for his person from foreigners, then it is his absolute duty to be just as strict with himself in every conceivable respect as he is with others. However, the rule is different for human beings. Human beings forgive themselves practically anything and everything, and they practice indulgence for themselves as often as this is at all possible. He even forgives himself for murder and manslaughter, and he always invents and finds an excuse me for every one of his lousy actions, while he forgives his neighbor and everyone else nothing at all, and always demands only the harshest punishment for them, whereby torture and death often cannot be harsh enough. Human beings often regard their own missteps, whether serious or not, as trivial offenses that can be excused at any time. The same missteps by others, however, are blamed severely and harshly on the wrongdoers.
However,
Once someone recognizes his or her own slips and missteps, they do not blame themselves, but rather some unfortunate circumstances and adverse influences, irresistible urges, and the oh-so-influenceable fate. But in fact, it is always much easier and more convenient to deny one's own guilt, but to denounce the mistakes of one's neighbor as intolerantly as possible, and to go through all the ups and downs of denigration. But truly, this is not a good thing to do, neither with regard to the rights and respect of one's neighbor, nor for one's own good, and to promote the fulfillment of one's own duty and the fulfillment of one's own duty, which is defined by the fact that the fulfillment of one's own duty is the duty that human beings should perform and cultivate with regard to the fulfillment of self-imposed and self-imposed humane duties through self-initiative. In simpler terms, self-obligation means the task of human beings to fulfill their own duties on their own initiative, which are, for example, respect, honor, honesty, good and correct behavior, openness, decent language and expression, reverence, peacefulness, truthfulness, good and correct action, truthfulness and true humanity, respect and appreciation, etc., both towards themselves and towards others, etc., both towards oneself and also towards others, whereby all forms of life and the entire environment, as well as the entire universal existence of all things are included, so that nothing exists universally that is not connected with the fulfillment of one's own duty. Some people may feel better and value themselves more highly than they are actually worth because of their knowledge, their profession, their origin, or because of their money, possessions and goods, etc. But in fact, no human being is able to fulfill his own duty. But in fact, no human being can measure his merit by simply claiming that he is better and greater than his neighbor, who may be of the same age and status or of a lower or higher age or status. Being greater is certainly not to be found in age or social status, nor in the amount of money or goods available, nor in the wise way of dressing, nor in the name or title of a human being. Greatness is characterized solely by the abilities and talents used, by education and by the education of opportunity, as well as by the truthful fulfillment of one's own duty and self-duty as a result of creation, and by the recognition and observance of creative truth and its laws and commandments. This alone makes human beings greater, wiser and better, and raises them above others in this wise, although they nevertheless remain human beings and must live in appropriate modesty without wanting to exalt themselves mightily. About this, human being of the earth, have an honest and open dialogue with yourself and realize that you, too, are no more than anyone else, that you are part of the laws and commandments of creation, which are as much your duty to fulfill as those of anyone else, and that as a human being, there is not one iota of difference between you and your neighbor, because you, like your neighbor, are life forms of the same creation that created the universe and all life in general. Human beings of Earth, think about this carefully. Very often have a reckoning with yourself, and not only in lonely hours when you feel abandoned by the world. Take a hard look at yourself in this respect and be a strict judge of yourself in order to assess how you fulfill the requirements of personal duty and self-duty, and how you can thereby achieve better evolution and higher and closer perfection. May human beings striving and will always be directed towards the path of duty and its fulfillment as well as towards evolution, so that the meaning of life may flourish and self-responsibility may be performed and fulfilled to the last iota. When a human being is called to an office of responsibility and duty, it must not be one who faces a beast of prey unarmed or crosses a raging river without a boat, climbs extreme mountains, navigates rapids in an unfit boat, throws himself from heights tied to ropes, or does other extreme and life-threatening things to satisfy his lust for danger, from which he shows no understanding or remorse for dying and death through his own fault. For such a human being knows neither self-responsibility nor responsibility for the environment, fellow human beings, and all other life. Only a human being is fit for any office or duty, of little or great responsibility, if he takes action with caring prudence and is willing to avert danger and to reconsider an endeavor thoroughly and to the point of safety and to exclude everything that brings danger to life.
Self-responsibility excerpt from Decalogue by Billy Edward Albert Meyer.
The observation of an all creation says that clear, creative laws and commandments exist which state that every life form is in its very own wise, fully, and comprehensively responsible for everything and anything it thinks and feels, as well as its actions and deeds, etc., in every respect itself, and to the best of its ability and understanding. Thus, human beings are always fully and comprehensively responsible for every thought, feeling, and action, and for all their deeds, etc., down to the last detail, because they, the human beings themselves, are the creators and originators of their thoughts, feelings, actions, and deeds, etc. Creation or an imaginary or human or inhuman god or idol is never, ever responsible for the thoughts, feelings, and actions or deeds of human beings, because thinking, feeling, and acting are always and without exception, and in every case generated, applied, and brought to effect by the human being himself through the cause, so he is also responsible in every respect. The responsibility for an effect from a cause always lies where the cause is created or caused. This unmistakably emphasizes the truth that the human being himself is responsible for all his thoughts, feelings, and actions, etc. For without doubt, he himself, without exception and always, provides the cause of his thoughts, which in each case brings about a certain effect. This is also undoubtedly the case when human beings take external influences as the cause of their thoughts, feelings, and actions.